One of the tablets of the reign of Cyrus illustrates the custom of the Assyrians and Babylonians in reckoning the regnal years of their kings, or the reigning years of the kings, from the beginning of their new years, and not from anniversary of the monarch's succession, or coming and sitting on throne, being put on throne. The passage in the tablet in question reads, from the month Nisan, the first month, that would be March, of the third year of Cyrus, king of countries, to the month Adar, the 12th month of the third year of Cyrus, king of countries. Previous to the conquest of Babylon by Cyrus, there reigned over the Babylonians Nabu-Nahid, or Nabonidus, for 17 years, his reign commencing BC 556. Late in his reign, he associated with himself on the throne his son, Belshazzar, the Belshazzar of the book of Daniel, who was slain on the night of the capture of Babylon, BC 539. Previous to the reign of Nabonidus, the Canon of Ptolemy, omitting or leaving out a short reign of 9 months, inserts the name of Neriglissar or Nergal-Sharezer, the son-in-law of Nebuchadnezzar, whose first year was BC 559 and his accession 560. The predecessor of Nergal-Sharezer was Evil-Merodach, son of Nebuchadnezzar, who ascended the Babylonian throne BC 562. The accession of Evil-Merodach is stated in 2 Kings 25-27 to have happened in the 37th year of the captivity of Jehoiachin, king of Judah, this captivity being thus fixed at BC 598. The captivity of Jehoiachin took place 7 years after the battle of Carchemish and the accession of Nebuchadnezzar, these events consequently belonging to BC 605. There is a slight difference of opinion among chronologists as to the date of the battle of Carchemish, which was fought between the forces of Pharaoh Necho, or King Necho of Egypt, and the Babylonians under Nebuchadnezzar. Mr. Sharp and Ernest de Bunsen place it BC 607, Professors Oppert and Lenormand in BC 606, while most other chronologists make it happen BC 605. At present, or at that particular time of the writing of this book, there was really no proof as to which of those is the correct date, or was the correct date. But the difference between scholars here, or then, was at the most 2 years. George Smith chose the date BC 605 as it appears to fit best the other dates and circumstances mentioned, and was followed by the majority of chronologists. The next date in question previous to the battle of Carchemish is the date of the fall of Nineveh. This date, however, does not much affect the general chronological question, and there is some variety of opinion with respect to it. It is placed as low as BC 606 by Professor Oppert and as high as 609 by others. Here again, there's no means of determining exactly the date, but the circumstances are related as follows. An arrangement was made between the king of Media, called in Berossus Astyages, but by other authors Zares, and Nabopolassar, king of Babylon, according to which Amuhia or Amytis, the daughter of the Median monarch, was married to Nebuchadnezzar, son of Nabopolassar, and the Babylonian and Median kings joined their forces in an attack against Nineveh. Nineveh was besieged by the Babylonian and Median armies for 2 years. And at the end of that time, part of the wall of the city being destroyed by the overflow of the river, the king of Assyria, in despair, set fire to his palace and perished in the flames. The destruction of Nineveh is connected with Jewish chronology through the action of Necho, king of Egypt, who marched out to take part in the final war against Assyria. Josiah, king of Judah, resisted the passage of Necho through his territory, and in a battle at Megiddo, Josiah was slain. See 2 Kings 23-29 and 2 Chronicles 35-22-24. The advance of Necho and death of Josiah happened 4 years before the battle of Carchemish, and there is the same difference of 2 years as to this date among chronologists, some placing the death of Josiah in BC 611, others in BC 610, and others in BC 609, which last date George Smith believed to be the correct one. In the period immediately before these events, Western Asia was exposed to the ravages of hordes of Scythians, who, passing the mountains of Caucasus, overran Media, Assyria, and Syria. The date of the Scythian invasion is unknown, and the chronology of this period very confused. No Assyrian date can be fixed with any certainty after the date of the accession of Nabu-pal-Uzzur or Nabopolassar at Babylon in BC 626, and this event appears to have closely followed the death of Ashurbanipal, king of Assyria. In the whole of this period, Assyrian chronological evidence is entirely wanting, although the later eponymous, whose names George Smith has given in paragraph 7071, belong to the period from BC 643 to 16, and probably extend to near its close, yet the order of the names is uncertain, and no political events were fixed to their eponymies. The next date in order in the list is the accession of Josiah king of Judah, which George Smith fixed at BC 640. This date is generally agreed upon. Only a few chronologists differ to the extent of 1 year, placing it at BC 641. Probably about this time happened an Assyrian campaign in Palestine, the account of which is now lost. In page 96, George Smith gives a late date in the reign of Ashurbanipal. In the eponymy of Balsadur of Tyre, apparently an Assyrian governor appointed after some conquest of the city. George Smith placed this date provisionally under the year BC 648, but it more probably belongs to another eponymy some years later. The evidence of the Assyrian inscriptions and of the eponym Canon ends with the eponymy of Samastai Nani, governor of Babylon, which George Smith provisionally placed BC 644. This eponymy may, however, have been for a little later. In the time of Assyrian, the last known record of Ashurbanipal, king of Assyria, was written, and they could obtain a good approximate idea of the chronology of the reign down to this point. George Smith arranged the events of this period as follows. And continues. Accepting the dates of the death of Esarhaddon, BC 668, and the War of Babylon, BC 650 to 648. All these dates are only conjectural, and the events may cover a longer period. All these dates fall within the reign of Manasseh, king of Judah, who died BC 642, 2 years before the accession of his grandson Josiah. Chronologists are generally agreed as to the date of the death of Manasseh. Some, however, place it 1 year earlier, in BC 643, and one Brandes makes it BC 641. The extracts, let's see it, is that 63 to 66, page 145 to 149, from the historical inscription of Ashurbanipal, belong to the period BC 650 to 645, during which time part of Palestine was overrun by the forces of Vitae, king of Arabia. And there's more extracts. Ashurbanipal, king of Assyria, was the successor of Esarhaddon, whose reign began in BC 681 and ended in BC 688. In George Smith's history of Ashurbanipal, he pointed out that before his death, Esarhaddon associated him on the throne, but he then supposed it was shortly before his decease or his death. In Assyrian Discoveries, page 417, George Smith showed that Ashurbanipal was reigning for 3 or 4 years at least with his father, and he was at this time able to prove that the act of crowning the young prince took place before Esarhaddon started for Egypt. Previous to this, no Assyrian king had gone beyond Palestine, and it was probably considered an expedition of considerable risk when Esarhaddon started to attack Tirhakah and to expel him from Egypt. Tirhakah had already contended on nearly equal terms with Sennacherib and had now stripped Assyria of her western provinces. Under these circumstances, Esarhaddon settled the succession to the crown before his departure, and this dated with some marvellous incidents introduced from one of his courtiers, K. 2701. The god Assur, notice it's a small g, or Assur, in a dream to the grandfather of a king, my lord the just prince. 2. The king, the lord of kings, the hearts of hearts, grandson of the just prince. Thou shalt restore the wisdom, etc., etc. Into the plantations of Haran, the dwelling of the god of cedar wood, he turned. And it carries on. It appears from this that the double halo seen around the moon was interpreted on the principle of its representing the two kings in favour of the coronation of Ashurbanipal, who assumed the government from the time when his father left for Egypt, probably in BC 673. As a matter of fact, however, Esarhaddon was in this probably only yielding to the desire of the Assyrian people in settling the succession before leaving on a dangerous expedition. You could have died, and who's going to reign next? Okay, in this place. As a few years previously, they had seen a deplorable civil war between the sons of Sennacherib on the death of that monarch. The extracts from the Assyrian annals belonging to this reign refer to three epochs. 1. The period at the beginning of his reign, when Esarhaddon attacked and conquered Zidon and took tribute from the kings of Palestine and Cyprus, BC 680, and his extracts the period subsequent to this, when Bahal, king of Tyre, was faithful to Assyria. 3 BC 673 and 672, when Esarhaddon attacked Tirhakah, king of Ethiopia, and Bahal, king of Tyre, who had revolted and relied for assistance upon Tirhakah, the Egyptian king. The name of Manasseh, king of Judah, occurs among the tributaries of Esarhaddon after the capture of Zidon, BC 680. Yet two of the chronologists, whose systems George Smith has quoted in chapter 1, make his accession later than this event. Haig in BC 677 and Bosaket in BC 763. The Bible, both in Kings and Chronicles, gives Manasseh a reign of 55 years, and as he died BC 642, his accession must have taken place in BC 697. Someone else sat on the throne in that year. He thus reigned during the latter part of the reign of Sennacherib, the whole of that of Esarhaddon, and part of that of Ashurbanipal. According to 2 Chronicles 23:11-13, a king of Assyria sent and carried Manasseh captive to Babylon, and after being a short time in captivity, he was restored to his kingdom. Now of these three Assyrian kings, contemporary with Manasseh, king Judah, only one, Esarhaddon, resided at Babylon, etc., etc. The British Museum possesses a cast of this curious monument. Okay, which is that? Okay, a stele cut in the rock near the mouth of the rivers Na El Kelb in the north of Palestine. The British Museum possesses a cast of this curious monument in a very bad condition, but a new inspection of the rock might give a much better cast. The following fragments can be made out from the present impression. King of nations, king of Assyria, with joy and shouting into Memphis, the capital city of Taku, king of Cush. So that's either the one in Mesopotamia or somewhere else. Africa, maybe? Not too sure on that one. Yeah, because usually the Mesopotamian Cush is usually spelt with a C. The Cushites. Okay, then their descendants eventually go into Africa, that region, meet a dark tribe, marry them, have children to their woman, and start this new tribe, this new version with a K, the Cushites, or the Cush, right? That's what we found through our personal research. Okay, he continues here with this history. This confirms the fragment already mentioned in page 141 and appears to state that Tirhakah had fortified Ascalon against the Assyrians. He had evidently extended his influence over the whole of Palestine and Cyprus, for Tyre and the 22 kings of these regions are mentioned, and Esarhaddon was forced to march against him or to give up the command of the Mediterranean coast. The extent of the revolt will account for the retribution of Esarhaddon, which included, as before stated, the final captivity of Israel and the imprisonment of Manasseh, king of Judah, at Babylon, to which city Esarhaddon retired after the conquest of Egypt. Up to this time, the people of Israel had been allowed their own rulers, although they had been directly appointed by the Assyrian monarchs since the capture of Samaria, but after this they were placed under military governors like the rest of Syria, and in fact incorporated with the empire. The writer of the book of Isaiah, chapter 7-8, fixes the date of this final captivity of Israel 65 years after one of the attacks of Pekah and Rezin on Ahaz, king of Judah. These Israelites sided with him and attacked the city and overtook it, according to I think it's 2 Kings 16:6 or something like that, or 19:6 or something. Can't remember the exact scripture, right? Book and scripture. Okay, so the attacks of Pekah and Rezin on Ahaz, king of Judah, and adding 65 to BC 673, we come to BC 738, at which date, according to Tiglath-Pileser, the king of Judah was at war with some of his northern neighbours. There is no other question connected with the reign of Esarhaddon, but on passing to the previous reign, that of Sennacherib, there are several important points. It will be more convenient here before giving these to sketch the chronology of the reign, giving the limits within which it appears the various campaigns took place, and it's all listed here. Gain more information. There is a general agreement among chronologists as to the date of the accession of Manasseh in Judah, which happened somewhere between BC 698 and 697, and George Smith chose BC 697 as the most probable date. In the earlier part of the reign of Sennacherib, BC 702-701, he conducted his great campaign against Hezekiah. King of Judah, which is recorded in extract 20 or 31. In the Assyrian annals, the date of this expedition is very clearly fixed, and there is no difference of opinion among scholars as to it, but there is some difficulty in fitting this date to the statements of the second book of Kings. As Hezekiah died BC 697 after a reign of 29 years, his accession must have happened BC 726, and 2 Kings 18:13 states that the expedition of Sennacherib took place during his 14th year, which would be BC 712. This date is just about 10 years higher than the date of Sennacherib's expedition, BC 702 to 701. And as the Assyrian date rests on the best contemporary evidence, various suggestions have been made to account for the discrepancy between the two. The most curious of these are the speculations of Haig and Bosanquet. Mr. Bosanquet, who cuts all the Bible dates down, finds the Assyrian date of Sennacherib's invasion, BC 702 to 701, too high for his system, and proposes that Sennacherib made an expedition against Hezekiah in the second year of the Jewish monarch's reign, which he fixes at BC 701. The Reverend D. H. Haig also reduces the chronology here, makes this the expedition in which Samaria was besieged. These two views are fairly out of question, as they are inconsistent with the Assyrian inscriptions. Dr. Oppert reads the biblical date, 14th year after Hezekiah's illness, instead of 14th of his reign. Ernest de Bunsen supposes that a previous expedition against Judah in the reign of Sargon, BC 711, which was close to the 14th year of Hezekiah, was the one intended. And there is certainly some ground for this opinion, in which he is supported by the Reverend A. H. Sayce, Mr. Basil Cooper, and some other chronologists. George M. Smith himself thought it a simpler and probably more correct view to suppose that there was an error in the Book of Kings, and that we should read 24th instead of 14th. The 24th of Hezekiah would be BC 702 and would well synchronize with the Assyrian date of this expedition. There was, however, so much to be said in favour of the view adopted by Ernest de Bunsen that he must point out some considerations in support of it. The Bible states that the expedition in the 14th year of Hezekiah was commanded by Sennacherib, king of Assyria, while the Assyrian Canon and the annals of Sargon show that the expedition of BC 711 was in the reign of Sargon, that of Sennacherib not commencing until 6 years later. It appears probable, however, that Sennacherib held some official rank during his father's reign, and it's quite possible that he commanded the expedition in BC 711 as his father's deputy. In the tablet K2169, Sennacherib is called Rabshakeh, or general and great royal son, that is heir to the throne. And he is to possess his own scribe. The passage reads: 1. Tablet of Aya Suzubu Ili, the scribe. 2. Of the Rabshakeh of Sennacherib. 3. The great royal son of Sargon, king of Assyria. The title, Great Royal Son, was assumed by Ashurbanipal when he was associated with his father on the throne. Although it may not be certain if the campaign is BC 711, is the one mentioned in the second book of Kings as directed against Hezekiah in his 14th year. Yet there are two other events mentioned which evidently belong to this period. One is the illness of Hezekiah, and the other is the embassy from Merodach Baladan to congratulate him on his recovery. These events certainly belong to BC 712, and in that year there was a partial eclipse of the sun visible at Jerusalem, which may possibly account for the alteration of the shadow on the dial of Ahaz, 2 Kings 28-11. The cylinder of Sargon in the British Museum and the annals on the walls of his palace appear to differ as to the regnal or reigning year of the expedition, BC 711. In the cylinder it is called the 9th year, but in the annals it is called the 11th year. George Smith supposed the difference to have risen from the two documents counting the reign of Sargon from two different starting points, but it is possible that this may be not so. It may indicate that the operations against Palestine were spread over the 2 years from BC 713 to 711. These operations against Ashdod are mentioned in Isaiah 20, where we read, "In the year that Tartan came unto Ashdod, when Sargon the king of Assyria sent him, and fought against Ashdod, and took it." A little earlier than these operations, in BC 715, the Assyrians were also in Palestine. In that year, Sargon conquered some of the Arabian tribes and transported them into Samaria. And Samsi, queen of Arabia, with Ithamar the Sabaean and Pharaoh of Egypt, gave present to the Assyrians. Extract 28. Before this year, there are, belonging to the reign of Sargon, the notices and fragments of the period, BC 722 and 720. These are given in extracts 22 to 27. In the present broken state of these fragments, it appears as if operations against Samaria, the capital of Israel, are mentioned both in BC 722 and 720, and the capture of the city and captivity of the inhabitants are both mentioned in BC 722. This date is therefore assumed by some scholars as the date of the captivity of the 10 tribes. But as the siege lasted 2 years, it appears to George Smith, more likely that it commenced in BC 722 and ended in BC 720. He accounted for the notice of the capture of Samaria in the annals at BC 722 by supposing that Sargon, having commenced the siege in that year, went on to describe its conclusion before mentioning the campaign of BC 721, which was in a totally different district. In confirmation of this opinion, it may be mentioned that the earliest inscription of Sargon, from which extract 27 is taken, which was made in BC 720, is silent as to the events of BC 722 and does not mention the capture of Samaria. From a consideration of the various texts, George E. Smith judged the orders of the events to be, and these are the following. These follow. The Assyrian evidence led him to suggest a new arrangement of the kings of the 25th or Ethiopian dynasty in Egypt. The Assyrian texts mention all the 3 kings, but instead of the first being Sabako, as in the copies of Manetho, it is Sevechus who appeared first in the Assyrian inscriptions. Manetho at present gives Sabako, Sevechus, Tukhaka, while the Assyrian account gives Sibahi or Sibhaki, the Sevechus of Manetho, the Sabatok of the inscriptions, and the So or Shiva of 2 Kings 17:4. he was reigning BC 720. Sabaku, the Sabako of the Greeks. Taku, the Tuhaka of the Bible, brother of the wife of Sabaku. The year BC 722 belongs partly to the reign of Shalmaneser and partly to that of Sargon. It is uncertain if the siege of Samaria was commenced before the death of Shalmaneser or not. The passage in 2 Kings 18:9 favours the view that Shalmaneser commenced the siege. Taking the accession of Hezekiah, he replaced Hezekiah on the throne, at BC 726, the siege of Samaria from BC 722 to 720 would precisely agree with the Bible account, which makes it last from the 4th to the 6th of Hezekiah. Hoshea, the last king of Israel, reigned 9 years, and as Samaria was captured BC 720, his reign must have commenced BC 729. And in extract 18, Tiglath-Pileser, whose annals end in this year, mentions Hoshea's accession. The second book of Kings, chapters 17 to 18, mentions that Hoshea was contemporary with Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, and paid him tribute. And during the reign of Hoshea, BC 729 to 720, the Assyrian Canon gives a reign of 5 years to Shalmaneser, BC 727 to 722. Throughout the reign of Hoshea, the correspondence between the Assyrian records and the Bible is striking. And complete, and it is not possible for any chronological system to be correct which moves his reign from the position in which it is fixed both by the Assyrian inscriptions and the second book of Kings. It is really that we can fix from external resources both the commencement and close of a reign, and therefore this case, in which the accession of Hoshea is given by Tiglath-Pileser, the contemporary king, Shalmaneser, given by the Canon, and the fall of Samaria by Sargon, is one of great chronological importance. The passage in Isaiah 14:28-29 appears to indicate that the death of Tiglath-Pileser took place very near the time of the death of Ahaz, and while Ahaz died in BC 726, according to the Bible, Tiglath-Pileser died late in BC 727, according to the Assyrian inscriptions. Here again, there appears a very close agreement between the two records. On passing up from this point to the reign of Ahaz, we are, however, surrounded with difficulties from which the lower dates are free. Ahaz is stated to have reigned 16 years, and therefore as he died BC 726, he must have ascended the throne BC 742. His reign was contemporary with that of Tiglath-Pileser, which extended from BC 745 to 727, and in the time there was an important and intimate connection between Assyria and Palestine. The last synchronism of importance in the annals of Tiglath-Pileser is at the accession of Hoshea, the king of Israel. The date of this event is fixed within narrow limits. It took place after Tiglath-Pileser's expedition to Palestine, which ended BC 732, and not later than BC 729, which was the 17th year of Tiglath-Pileser, and the year in which his annals ended. This makes a possible latitude of 2 years BC 731 to 729, and is a curious fact which George Smith pointed out with respect to the later dates, that there is a doubt to the extent of 2 years all down the chronology. And he, as he states on page 176, chose the date BC 729 for the accession of Hoshea, which someone else took over from him, having adhered to the lower dates throughout as they appear to George Smith to agree better with the Assyrian evidence. Next in order, above the accession of Hoshea, we have the war in Palestine, which lasted from BC 734 to 732. The date and place of this war are fixed by the Assyrian Canon and extracts 16 to 20. Give what now remains of the Assyrian account. Beside these, there is one fragment which formed the first words of the war, and in position goes before extract 16, and should form part of that extract, but there is so much matter lost between the fragments that George Smith did not introduce it. It is reason of Syria, ... Small as this fragment is, it is valuable as showing that the name of Rezin was in the heading which explained the origin of the war. It is generally agreed among Assyriologists that this war was the one mentioned in 2 Kings 16, 2 Chronicles 28, and Isaiah 7, in which Ahaz, being attacked by Rezin, king of Damascus, and Pekah of Israel, sent and asked the aid of Tiglath-Pileser, who then came and conquered the whole of Palestine. The agreement between the fragments of the Assyrian record and the biblical account is here clear enough, and there can be no doubt that they refer to the same events. So they agree with each other, they synchronize. But there is a curious difference as to the name of the king of Judah. Ahaz is the name given to this monarch in the Bible, but the Assyrian inscription, extract 20, calls him Yahuhazi or Jehoahaz. In this case, there is no question as to the identity of the monarch. That is certain, and in consequence various theories have been advanced to account for the difference of name. Nothing, however, is known on this point, but George Smith was able to bring some evidence to show that these tribute lists were sometimes carelessly compiled and in error as to names. This very tribute list, extract 20, is one instance in point. It contains the name of Metinti of Ascalon, who was already dead, according to extract 17, and had been succeeded by Rukiptu, his son, and among the other tributaries is quoted Vasumi of Tubal, who, we are informed directly afterwards, refused to come and give tribute, yet his name figures among the others as paying it. There is another instance in the tribute list in the first expedition of Ashurbanipal, extract 51, which, so far as it is preserved, contains the same names as that of Esarhaddon, about 13 years before, being most probably a literal copy of the earlier document, without any attempt to ascertain if these kings were still reigning, and if they really paid tribute. One of these names is particularly doubtful. The first in the list, Bahal of Tyre, who was in rebellion late in the reign of Esarhaddon, and only submitted on the third expedition of Ashurbanipal. These evidences of error in the tribute lists are accompanied by similar false statements as to foreign proper names in the annals of some of their kings, and should serve as a caution against attaching too much importance to a difference in a proper name between the Bible and the inscriptions. Okay, and it continues. If you like this video, give us a like, subscribe to our channel, add your comments below, and then go share this with your family, friends, neighbours who might be history buffs, and they might find some extra information to better their understanding of biblical history in general, especially the Assyrian history, the chronology, etc., etc.